have it by client or customer. So in T37, I'm going to say this equals and point to that 720. And now that's our only person that owes us money. So all of our customers, of course, then add up to 720. So if I double click on that, I can see there they are. I don't know why there's a blank cell here, but that ties out to the 720 here, and that ties out to the 720. So who owes us 720? Well, if I look down the subsidiary ledger, P owes us 720. All right, now let's look at the next one. 718 says purchase supplies on account to be paid in the future from L, H, and G. Okay, so question, is cash affected? And in this case, no. How do we know? Because we purchased it on account and we're going to pay it in the future. Therefore, what are we going to pay with? Really, we're going to pay with an IOU. So it's not our IOU that we're going to receive. It's not the IOU we're going to receive, which would be a receivable. It's going to be an IOU that we're going to pay, which we're going to call a payable, accounts payable. However, oftentimes we don't select liabilities as often as, say, assets. So it might help us to think about what we are receiving first in order to know whether we should debit or credit the account that we are affecting. So we purchased supplies, in this case landscaping supplies, and we see supplies up here as an asset. We also see supplies down here is going to be an expense. Now, we're going to do the same thing for the same reasons as basically the prepaid insurance and put it on as an asset and then expense it over time. Once again, the idea being that if supplies is material, then we should expense it in the period in which it's used rather than when it was paid. So the system we're going to set up is say, hey, bookkeeping department, whenever you buy supplies, put it on as an asset. Then at the end of the month, we're going to count the supplies similar to how we would count inventory and expense the supplies that were used in that type of system. So we have the asset up here and it has a debit balance. We're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which in this case would be another debit. So I'm going to copy that supplies. I'm going to put that on top right next to the date in H14, right click and paste it 1, 2, 3. The amount that we purchased on 718 is 140. So 140 here, if we debit something, we're also going to have to credit something. Only 2 accounts in most of these transactions, therefore the credit must also be a negative 140 to represent the credit in brackets in that way because of the formatting of the Excel spreadsheet. So what's the credit going to go to? It will go to accounts payable. So once again, we already knew that we were going to hit accounts payable, but now we can see that we're going to credit accounts payable. Does that make sense? Well, accounts payable has a credit balance. We're going to owe more stuff. Therefore, the bad thing's going to go up. How do we make something go up? We do the same thing to it as what it is, which in this case would be a credit. So it does make sense that we would credit it. And of course, we already knew that because we debited the asset. So I'm going to right click and paste the credit here. Accounts payable. There's our transaction. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so we can see the entire thing in the taskbar down to 70 again. And scroll over so we can see as much of the GL as possible. We're going to post the landscaping to the general ledger. And so the landscaping supplies is up here. It's the third account on the trial balance. Here's the general ledger, third account on the general ledger. There it is in cell X24 equals, I'm going to point to that to 140. And when we select enter, it should go up here, and I mean, we're out of balance here. And we can see that the landscaping went up here. All right, now we're going to go to the accounts payable. So accounts payable is down here. It's going to be our first orange count on the trial balance. It's going to be a first orange count on the general ledger. We see it over here in AG12. So in AG12, we're going to select equals. Going to take our mouse and go all the way over here and point to that credit next to the accounts payable, which is in cell J15, and enter. And notice that makes the payable go up. This is a liability account. We don't affect the liabilities account as often as we deal with, say, cash. Therefore, we may not realize as well how liability accounts are affected. Notice that the liability is a negative here. We're doing the same thing to it, which makes it go up to 2,140. We see that here as well. We see that down here as well. All right, and we also hit the liability account there. So if we do that, then we need to ask the next question. If we ask, how much do we owe people? Well, we owe people 2,140. Well, who do we owe? Well, we can look at the GL, but that only tells us when we incurred the debt. It doesn't tell us who we owe. Where do we go to see who we owe? We go to the subsidiary ledgers. So here's the accounts payable subsidiary ledger, which is in order not by date, but by vendor. And the vendor, of course, here is L, H, and G again. So we're going to go in the credit column and say equals, because we owe them another 140. So we're just going to put the same information that is in the GL in the subsidiary ledger. However, the subsidiary ledger will be further broken out by vendor so that the people that we owe now adds up to 2,140, which ties out to this, which ties out to the trial balance. All right, let's make this large again, going back up to 100%, like so we can actually see some stuff on the screen. And we're going to scroll down, and we are now on 720. 720 says we completed job for S company, received 250, and will receive at a later time 300. All right, so is cash affected? Yes, it says we received 250 for the job. So we're going to say cash is affected. Cash is a debit balance. We're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which in this case would be a debit. So I'm going to copy that cash, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put that in cell H17 and right click and paste 1, 2, 3. And the amount that we received then is 250. However, we invoiced for more than 250. So we got 250 in cash, and then we say, okay, you still owe us another 300 for that job. So if we scroll up here, what's the account representing people owing us money? That's the receivable. So when we do the job, we still think that we have something that we have received. We received an IOU. The IOU is an asset. We need to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which is another debit. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this 1, 2, 3. Now this journal entry is a little bit confusing because there's more than one account here. The debits and the credits will still be equal. I mean, there's more than 2 accounts here. The debits and credits will still be equal, but we will have 3 transactions we're going to enter. So we broke out the receipt between cash and receivable. The total bill was for $550. Now we need a credit for that $550. Now, we can type in the $550. I can say, well, that adds up to $550, so the bill must be for $550, negative $550. The other way we can do it is I'm going to use the sum function to do this. So I'm going to say equals SUM and start using the sum function. Then I'm going to highlight not just these 2, but the 4 cells, just in case later on we might have debits and credits up there, and then enter. So if we do that, then if we mess up on this and say this should be 350 or something like that, it will change automatically. I'm going to change this back to 300. Now note that this is a debit and we want to make it a credit. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to double click on that. There's our formula. Notice that one way to flip the sign of something is to multiply it times -1. -1 times anything will flip the sign. That's really what we want. So we have this minus this equals 0. Note that that's a little bit long of a formula. We could do that a little bit easier. I know I'm just kind of going on a tangent here, but we could do that easier by putting the negative before the S, negative, and that'll flip the sign. And so the negative sum function that will be useful in this type of worksheet if we use this could be then entered instead of hitting an equal sign. Just select negative SUM, and Excel still sees that as a formula function, even though it's not an equal, and then highlight these cells and enter. So that's the plug form. I call that a plug formula, the negative sum formula. All right, so then what will that account be? That's all we need then. And why are people paying us money, and will they pay us money in the future? Because we earned revenue. So here's the revenue account, and revenue has a credit balance. It only goes up. We do work, we only get more revenue. And how do we make something go up? We do the same thing to it, which in this case is a credit. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it right here. And we already knew that we credited it because we debited the things that we received, cash and receivable. All right, so let's bring this a little bit smaller on the taskbar, back down to 70. Going to scroll over here a bit, and we're going to look for that checking account. That's the first thing we got. So here's a checking account up here. It's got 5,205 in it. It's a debit. We're going to make it go up by doing the same thing to it, which is another debit. So here it is on the general ledger. This is called posting. So we are in T16 equals, going to point to that 250. That's going to bring the debit balance up in the debit direction from 52005 to 5455. Then we've got the receivable. That's our second account on the trial balance. Will therefore be the second account on the GL, and we are going to make that go up because we have a debit over there. So we're going to say in cell X10 equals, point to that 300, and the debit will go up in the debit direction to 1020. Then we need to post this receivable. That's way down here in the darker blue areas of the trial balance. So we're going to go way over here to the darker blue area of the general ledger, which is way over here. So we're going to have to tag over a bit. And notice it's a revenue account. Revenue only has credits. They're only going to have credits in here. So we are in AO10 equals, I'm going to use the arrows this time. I could just point to that 550, but I'm going to use the arrows so we can see it. Going to go all the way over here. Going to go down. There's the revenue that we want. I want that 550 and enter. So at the end of the day, we have J19 in this cell, which is the negative 550, bringing the revenue up from 720 to 1,270. And what happened in net income? It went up by that 550. Revenue minus the expenses means that revenue is winning by 800. That's income, net income at this time. Also note that we put 300 in the receivable account. And if we look at a receivable account, we say, how much do people owe us? 1,120. Next question. When are they going to pay us? And who owes us that money? Well, we can look at the GL, but it only tells us by date. We need to go down to the subsidiary ledger for that information. So in this case, we did the job for S company. So I'm going to put our cursor in X37. We're just going to put the same information in the GL down here. Now notice we're putting the 300. We're not putting the 550 of the total bill, of course, because they paid us 250 of it and they only owe us 300. So we're going to say 300. And so now the people that owe us money in the subsidiary ledger by client adds up to that 1,020, which ties out to the general ledger, which ties out to the trial balance. Now let's make this large again, back up to 100%, back over to our worksheet, back down to, we can go back up this time because we're at the top of the sheet now. So now we're on 722, which says paid L, H, and G for the purchase of in the past on account. So now we're going to pay off the L, H, and G, one of our vendors. So is cash affected? Yeah, we're going to pay, meaning we're going to pay with a check, most likely. So cash has a debit balance. We're going to make it go down by doing the opposite thing to it, which in this case is a credit. So I'm going to copy that. Here's the date. Going to put it on the bottom in cell H22. Right-click and paste it 1, 2, 3. The credit will go in J22. It's going to be a negative 175 and enter. If we credit something, we're going to debit something as well for 175. And the only question is, what will that debit be? Well, if we pay for something, we got something, but we got it in the past. So we're not buying something at this time. We're paying off the IOU, that IOU being the accounts payable. So this is what we owe to someone else, obviously, being that 2,140. It needs to go down because we're paying it, therefore we no longer owe it. It has a credit balance represented by the brackets. In order to make something go down, we do the opposite thing to it, which in this case would be a debit. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that 1, 2, 3 in H21. We already knew it was a debit because we credited cash, of course. That's why we think about cash first a lot of time. All right, now we're going to post this out. So I'm going to make this smaller in the taskbar, bring it back down to 70 so we can see more of our stuff over here. So here's our journal entry. And the accounts payables, the first items. So we're going to say accounts payables are our first orange item. So if we look at the general ledger, accounts payable over here is the first time we're going to debit accounts payable, making it go down. It's a very exciting moment. So we're in AF13 equals, and we're going to point to this 175. And notice that's the credit. We're going to debit it, which makes it go down. So once again, we don't work with the liabilities quite as much as, say, cash. So it's good to take a look at this account and say, okay, yeah, that went down because we paid it off. We owe less money. Credit balance went down by doing the opposite thing to it, just like all accounts do. We do the opposite thing to it, making it go down. All right, so then the other half is cash, and we credited cash. So cash is our first account here on the TB trial balance. It's also first account on the GL general ledger, and here it is in U17. So we're going to say equals. I'm going to point to that 175. That's going to bring the debit down to 5280. Also note that we affected our accounts payable. So we're going to have to think about this again. We're going to say, who do we owe? We owe people 1,965. Well, who do we owe? We can look at the GL, but it doesn't tell us that. We're going to have to look to the general ledger or the subsidiary ledger for accounts payable. So we're going to scroll down here. We're going to say we paid off some of this L, H, and G. That's what we're going to post this same information down here. So here's our first debit by vendor. In this case, these are vendors. And we're going to point to that 175 and enter. And so now we owe L, H, and G 1,465, and then we owe the A company 185, and so on. And we see that that adds up to 1965, which ties out to the accounts payable, which ties out to the accounts payable on the general ledger and the trial balance, respectively. All right, so we're going to make this large again, going back up. on the taskbar to 100%, scrolling back over to the left. Oh, we're at the top this time, so we're up here. So I'm on 724, and 724 says paid for fuel and oil.